Yes, systematic racism does exist in Canada. And yeah, Jagmeet Singh, the only racialized leader of a Canadian federal political party, called out a white MP for being racist in Parliament after voting down a motion on systematic racism in the RCMP. So what happens when you stand up against racial injustice in the Canadian Parliament? Well, apparently you get silenced and removed from the premises.
What the hell is even that?
Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, London, Miami, Toronto, New Orleans, Paris, New York City, Vancouver, Montreal, and Minneapolis. Protests around the world have erupted in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, in reaction to the murder of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers. For hundreds of thousands of protesters, now is a time to unwind hundreds of years of colonialism, racial oppression, injustice, and blatant racism that continues to plague the lives of Black people in America and in countries around the world. One resounding call to action is the call to defund the police, which represents a series of policy changes that can have a significant impact on how we police our communities. This rallying cry heard around the world represents the idea of taking some funding away from our police forces and rerouting it to other organizations that might have better tools and training to respond to certain situations. And there are a number of cities and police forces that agree with this move and are welcome to new ideas on how we police our communities. On the heels of these calls to defund police, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the federal New Democratic Party, tabled a unanimous consent motion in Parliament that would recognize systematic racism in the RCMP, take specific actions to review the policies and procedures used by RCMP officers, and review all of the past use of force incidents in the force's history. This move, a unanimous consent motion, allows Parliament to get something going or to recognize something quicker than it otherwise would be able to. These are usually used for things that the member doesn't expect there to be any opposition. Like, for example, if Parliament wanted to recognize the long career of a military member at their retirement or something else like that. These motions get a single vote, and if there's a yes from everyone, then they get written into the record. However, these motions actually need 2 different votes. The first is for the motion to be read as unanimous consent, which means that all the members in the room agree that they're just going to hear the content of the motion, not have any debate, and move forward on a vote. If Parliament accepts, the motion is read and then there's a vote. Usually a unanimous yes from everyone in Parliament. Jagmeet's motion was for the House to recognize the systematic racism in the RCMP, after a number of Indigenous people had died at the hands of RCMP officers in recent months.
It wasn't a point of order. I also have a unanimous consent motion. Is it the right time to rise on that? Okay. There have been consultations, and I hope if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion. That the House recognize that there is systemic racism in the RCMP, as several Indigenous people have died at the hands of the RCMP in recent months, and call on government to do the following. Increase non-police investments in nonviolent intervention, de-escalation, and mental health and addiction supports. B, ensure that the RCMP is truly accountable to the public. C, release all RCMP incidents of use of force reports and the associated settlement costs. And D, immediately launch a full review of the use of force by the RCMP, including reviewing the tactics and the training that is given to RCMP officers in dealing with the public.
There were a couple other points in the motion as well, like reviewing the RCMP's $10 million a day budget, and a review of all of the policies and procedures that are given to RCMP officers who engage with the public. After Jagmeet stood to introduce the motion and mentioned what it was about, the Speaker asked if there was unanimous consent to at least hear the content of the motion as is standard practice. But then, out of somewhere in the back of the room, a loud no is heard.
Does the Honourable Member for Burnaby South have the unanimous consent of the House to move the motion? Agreed? Oh, I'm sorry? No? Okay, we don't have a unanimous consent, I'm afraid.
This is so abnormal that the Speaker has a double take and goes back again to check that he heard it right. There was not consent to hear the motion, which was enough to prevent Jagmeet from even presenting it. And so it was killed. In the background, you can hear some words being exchanged, and you can faintly hear Jagmeet calling Bloc Québécois MP Alain Therrien a racist.
Il y a un point d'ordre?
This prompted the whip of Le Bloc Québécois, Claude de Bellefeuille, to stand on a point of order and demand that Jagmeet apologize for calling Alain racist, saying that that accusation was unparliamentary and demanding an apology.
I'd like you to establish order in this House because the NDP leader is insulting a member of my caucus.
At this time, the deputy chair stood to tell Jagmeet that the term racist was considered unparliamentary and that he would have to withdraw it. Jagmeet stood to say that he did indeed refer to Alain as a racist, and he did believe it. And no, he was not going to take it back. De Bellefeuille then accused Singh of ignoring the authority of the deputy chair in the House and asked that he be rejected for the rest of the day in a process called naming.
Want to interview once again? Yes. One last time, please, Chair, because I am absolutely floored that this member attacked in front of everyone your authority as the chair. I would like him to leave the chamber immediately.
In Westminster parliamentary systems like Canada and the United Kingdoms, members usually represent a geographic region, and they're usually titled to represent that region. For example, the member from Sudbury-Nickel Belt. If the Speaker or the chairperson of the House says your actual name, then what they're saying is you're no longer fit to represent your region today, and you need to leave to cool down. Mr. Singh, I must name you for disregarding the authority of the chair and for not taking back the word racist, and order you to withdraw for the House for the remainder of the sitting day. And then he went out to talk to reporters. On the naming issue, it's actually really rare for a speaker to get involved and ask a member to leave. This is only the 5th time that this has happened in the last 20 years, and most times it's as a result of an MP asking the speaker to get an apology from another MP over something that they said. And there is precedent where calling someone racist garners an apology in the House. But there are more times where actually getting kicked out of Parliament can be more valuable and more powerful to the conversation in the long run. So why then was Jagmeet kicked out for saying the word racist when other mostly white MPs have gotten away with saying arguably worse things in Parliament? Well, simply because it rubbed Claude de Bellefeuille the wrong way. That's all. So then, was Jagmeet right? Could you call Alain Therrien a racist just for voting down the RCMP motion? Yeah, I think so. The rallying cry to defund police is also rooted in breaking down the systems of racism that were built into the foundations of our police forces. Historically, in both Canada and the United States, police forces were founded to oppress non-white communities. In the South, it was rangers who were given the authority to capture and return slaves to their owners, and in Canada, it was the Northwest Mounted Police, which was founded in 1873 to stop American expansion north of the 49th parallel, to help settlers settle the prairie provinces, and which would later become the RCMP in 1920. The RCMP was founded to control the Indigenous peoples in what is now Western Canada, and to help settlers expand their presence into the prairies. The RCMP moved Indigenous nations onto small pockets of land that barely resembled their traditional territories and could not sustain the entire community. This was something that started in the 1800s but went well into the 1960s with Inuit communities in the high Arctic. There are elders in Nunavut that are alive today that still remember the RCMP slaughtering their entire family's dog sled team just so that the family couldn't leave the new town that was built for them by the government and run by the police. You can draw a red line from the removal of Indigenous nations from their land, through the removal of Indigenous children from their parents' arms, right to the removal of Wet'suwet'en land defenders and water protectors on the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project territory. The RCMP has been a constant force of removal and oppression in the lives of Indigenous nations in Canada. Some survivors of the residential schools still have terrible memories of a knock at the door from a red-clad Mountie officer as something from their nightmares. In some Indigenous languages in British Columbia, the words used to describe the RCMP literally translates to those who come to take us away. There are hundreds of years of painful experiences behind those words, and those words still ring true. Canada saw the video of Chief Alan Adam getting arrested by RCMP officers, or rather getting pushed, punched, and bloodied into submission by the officers, and we wept with him. We heard the stories of Rodney Levi and Chantel Moore, two Indigenous people who were killed by RCMP, both times after the force had been called to do a safety check on them. So, when you have a police force that continues to disproportionately kill and arrest Indigenous people, when that same police force is over 80% white, and when that police force was literally designed to put Indigenous peoples on reserves and to take away their children, you cannot tell me that racism or anti-Indigenous beliefs are not built into that force. When 6% of women in Canada can identify as Indigenous, but 42% of Canada's women prison population is Indigenous, there's something clearly not right there. When the RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lukey was asked about systematic racism within the force, she denied it existed, and there was public outcry across Canada. Jagmeet was only asking that Parliament recognize that this racism exists, and that they start to do something to look into it. So when a white MP uses the power that he knows he has to vote down a motion, to not even hear it, to refuse to let the conversation even start, yeah, he's a racist. Alain Therrien used his privilege as an elected white man to vote down a motion in the House of Commons. A motion that would have forced the government, not even his own party, to look into things, but that was too much and he refused. It's reminiscent of something that I see all over Canada. There are so many people that want to participate in the difficult conversations around racism and oppression. But then there are so many more that are simply okay with ignoring it, choosing to believe that it's not their problem. And 9 out of 10 times, that person is white. This is where I have a problem. See, me and MP Therrien, we're on the winning side of the Canadian system. And yeah, you heard me right. I'm saying that there are two systems for Canada. One for white people and one for not white people, mostly our Indigenous nations. And that's why we have an Indian Act. Let me use my own family as an example. My grandparents on my father's side immigrated to Canada from the Netherlands in the 50s, and they went on to raise 7 children on a chicken farm in Northern Ontario. They sold eggs to other families in the area, and they made a life for themselves. Now, I'm not saying that they had it easy, trying to raise 7 kids on a chicken farm, but I'm saying that the system was designed to give them the best shot possible. And they did. Some of their kids now have PhDs, another one has run for parliament in the past, and I have over 20 cousins that are now becoming young adults and entering into our own lives. However, 10 kilometers from where my grandparents raised their kids was a reserve. Had a family that lived on that reserve gotten chickens and wanted to sell eggs, they couldn't, because it was illegal for anyone to buy agricultural products from an Indigenous person. And heck, it was illegal to sell them anything, so they wouldn't have been able to get the chickens or the coops in the first place. So then, over 50 years later, my grandparents' farm profited and they eventually retired. Their kids grew up to live their own lives, and now my entire family shares in the wealth that we were able to build in a single generation. But that family on the reserve, they never made a profit. They weren't able to own or pass down the house they were in to their kids, if the schooling system didn't already take them away. This is only looking back 2 generations, but already the difference between a white and a First Nations community in my region is incredible. Hear me out. Canada was never designed to be the multicultural utopia that we've worked so hard to build over the last half century. 100 years ago, our leaders wanted to kill the Indian and the child, firmly believed that the Canadian climate would be inhospitable to Black people, and wanted to price out Chinese individuals so that they would never be able to afford moving here, all while giving away free swaths of land to those that we considered white. I was born on the winning side of that system, and I cannot count the number of blessings and privileges that I've gotten in my life as a result of that. I have gone to school, I am healthy and cared for, I have a government that protects me, and Alain Therrien, the system gave you those exact same privileges. So the fact that he even refused to hear what it's like to be on the other side of that system, the fact that he shut down the conversation that was being brought to him by someone who actually experiences being racialized every single day of their life, by that one swing of his hand to ignore the conversation completely just because it was inconvenient for him, that's what makes him a racist.
Saw the face of racism. That's what it looks like when someone dismisses the reality that people are going through. And so I had a moment of anger.
Starting to get hot in here in July, but we're very happy that you've all come to check out another Canada Explained video. As a small YouTube channel, it means a lot to us when you leave a comment, a like, and subscribe. And please do share this video. It is a part of an incredible, important conversation that's happening all across our country, and we do want to be a part of it.